stories give us context about where we are in the world. What you appreciate appreciates. And so if you actually think, okay, I'm going to appreciate, the things that are genuinely nourishing to me in my life. I know that, the joke about Irish people not being able to give a short answer to any question is very true.
Welcome to P&P, the Partners in Positivity podcast, where
Aisling Burnett
and myself, Sarah Harty, warriors of EBP, SPP, DHBs, that's emotionally bulletproof, spiritually bulletproof, divine human beings, aim to wake up and shake up the nation through positivity, humour, and shared wisdom.
Before we get stuck into another awesome episode, we just want to let you know that we have a donation page if you wish to support the podcast and help us to continue providing more amazing episodes for you. If you want to Google Partners in Positivity, you'll find our Buzzsprout site, and on there you can find a support button. You can click on that and support to your heart's content, whether it's a one-time donation or a monthly subscription. We really appreciate all the donations that we get. Thanks so much. Enjoy the episode.
Today on the Irish and international stage of our P&P podcast, we have another unique and supreme divine human being, a great friend and mentor of mine, Paul J Corcoran. From the moment I met Paul working side by side in a restaurant in Galway, Ireland in 2014, he fascinated me. I felt every conversation we had opened my mind to new insights and understanding of life. Paul is a celebrant and solemnizer with Pagan Federation Ireland. This calm, eloquent and creative professional writes beautiful ceremonies and believes that rituals add richness to living. Personally, my greatest gratitude for Paul is the mentorship he gifted me with through the public speaking organisation Toastmasters International. Paul held many committee roles in Galway Toastmasters and is currently immediate past president of Killarney Toastmasters in County Kerry, where he is still actively supporting, mentoring and empowering members to stand up and speak up. Aisling and I would not be Advice for Positivity without the rich connection we made with this gentleman. Partners in Positivity, please give the warmest welcome to Paul J Corcoran. Paul, thank you for clapping on camera. That was so pleasurable for me, recognizing you for the great person that you are. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. How are you?
Thank you very much for inviting me on, Aisling and Sarah. That was a very warm and lovely introduction. I've got heart bubbles from it. No, thank you. I hope that's not an actual medical condition that I've just said I might have.
You know what? I noticed on an ambulance the other day that it said heart health or heart life, which I thought was very positive. And I reckon definitely those bubbles that you're feeling in your chest is healthy for your heart.
I was actually trying to remember what year we met because I knew it was more than 6 years ago, but I couldn't work out exactly what year it was. So thank you for doing the research and figuring out it was 2014.
2014, yeah, that was the year I came back from Australia, and then I moved to Galway, and my gorgeous brother's girlfriend Emer suggested that I take up a job in a restaurant where you were, Maxwell's, and we had some crack working there, didn't we? But I don't know if you remember asking me to go to Toastmasters for the first time, but previous to that, my mother's friend Regina called her one day and said, "Hey Anne, I know this club, this organisation in Wexford. I'm sure Sarah would love it. You should recommend it to her, Toastmasters International." And actually at the time there was a club setting up in my local town, Portarlington, but it never actually got off the ground, unfortunately. But then when I moved to Galway and met you, you were really a catalyst for me in getting me to Toastmasters and to the level of my ability in speaking right now. So thanks for that. How is everything going for Toastmasters Killarney right now?
It's been good. It's been challenging, but it's good. I was just going to add on to what you were saying, because I remember you already being familiar with it and that you had been looking for a club, because I had been talking about, because I can remember walking into the kitchen of the restaurant with you, like carrying plates back and forth, having chats about the club and encouraging you to come along to one of the next meetings.
Yeah.
So I must have been the education officer or the president that year, maybe education. So I think I tried to get you on an agenda as soon as possible.
Yeah, as soon as I went to a couple of meetings and decided to stay, you were like, okay, Sarah, you're going to be secretary of the club from now on.
The Killarney Club is good. We have a very nice vibe at our meetings, and it's because we've been on Zoom since March last year. Yeah, the end of March, because we decided to stop our meetings, I think, in February, at the end of February. And we had one meeting in person in February, and we were thinking this isn't. I remember saying to people like, we can't shake hands, and we need to be quite mindful of distance.
Yeah.
And then after that one, we had a conversation with them. No, we can't continue this safely from here on. So we had a couple of weeks off, and then we moved onto Zoom in March, and there was the usual teething of trying to figure out how this works and how we restructure our meetings to make a meeting over Zoom better. And many members didn't come back or didn't continue because it's not the same experience. Like you don't have the same sense of camaraderie and community as you would attending a physical meeting. And there's a sense that we're continuing over Zoom for the continuity of the club rather than this being a preferred way forward.
Yeah, that's happened for a lot of clubs across the country.
Like our membership is fairly low. We've got like 15 members now, I think. And whereas we were, high 20s. And we have 2 speeches a meeting, and we have good topic sessions and so on. So the meetings have actually come on quite well. Like I do really enjoy the meetings now. Like for the first part on Zoom, they were really tiring, trying to, correct things and repeatedly saying to people, you're on mute. Can you unmute? Or can you please mute?
Yeah, naturally. Yeah.
And there's a huge shift as well in the decorum that's acceptable over Zoom than in person. So for myself, when I was still president I was president when we decided to stop meeting physically and shift onto online meetings. So even those meetings where we were meeting over Zoom and I was still in my president role, I still got dressed up in a suit and dress shoes and wore the chain of office and stood where possible for the meetings, because those behaviors do have an impact. And it took a while as well for people to realize that, you can't just sit on the couch and have the Zoom on over there as if you're watching television, because you're not actually partaking. So those things have shifted, and people have been able to as well to give each other feedback on their presentation. Next time when you're giving a speech, could you try making sure that you're facing the light and that your camera's at the right angle and that you're standing where possible, those sorts of things.
Yeah, it has been a huge transition and a challenging one going from offline to online for organisations like Toastmasters. I remember last year speaking in a Facebook group online, and it was my first time speaking to camera for like maybe up to 30 minutes with nobody responding. And I found it very hard to keep my energy up, keep the momentum up, looking into the circle on a device rather than a group of people. And I really thought about how difficult it has been for organisations, for groups been forced to go online. Fair play to everyone that has gone online. I went on one Toastmasters Galway meeting last year, and I just love the sense of community, and I was overjoyed to see everyone on screen from different age groups, different backgrounds, making such a huge effort to learn a few new tricks to keep the organisation strong. So well done to you in Kerry as well. And I want to ask you, could you share some stories, or even one story, about someone coming to the club to develop in confidence or to learn a speech for something really important for them, like a wedding or for work even, and just to talk about the support that Toastmasters offers?
I am thinking now, and the first story that comes to mind is a man who came to the club in Kerry for a year, and his reason for coming, we found out after a few conversations, was that his daughter was getting married the following year, and he was terrified of doing a Father of the Bride speech. And yeah, he was just such a gentleman. We had lots of chats afterwards, and there was, I think it took a few months for him to be able to do a topic, to be able to stand and deliver a table topic, which is where someone is presented with a speech topic they haven't heard before, and they're asked to stand and speak for 1 to 2 minutes about that topic, which is terrifying in person, because you have a room of 20 to 30 people all standing, all sitting, listening to you standing, talking about something that you don't know anything about potentially, and it can sound like you're waffling. So the challenge is to be able to say something and feel okay about it, and then sit down again afterwards, and ideally work up to being able to form a coherent 2-minute speech with an introduction, a point, an illustration, and a conclusion, and then handing it back to the topics master. So this particular man, I think we got him to, we eventually were able to support him. He delivered 1 speech. Yeah, he delivered 1 speech, and that for him was enough. And we never found out how he got on with his daughter's wedding, because he came back for 1 meeting afterwards, and then we didn't see him again, because he actually came quite a distance to come to the club. I'm trying to remember other people and other heartwarming stories. I mean, every single person who's been has some story of some sort. And one of the wonderful things about Toastmasters is that you actually get to hear such an in-depth unfolding of people's stories and their journeys through themselves, through their speeches and their topics. You know, be that either through their sense of being able to stand and give a speech, or even more challenging is to trust your own wisdom and authority to give someone else an evaluation, and be able to say, I really enjoyed your speech, and here's the things I liked, and here's one thing that I personally think that you could do differently next time to level that up a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I can think of lots of examples of times that people have given speeches that were really important for them to have delivered, and a lot of them are probably the very early on ones where people do their icebreaker, which is your introduction to the club. And that's in many ways it's interesting early on, where people, when they give their first icebreaker, will often have like a list of qualities about themselves that they're just going to deliver to you. And a huge part of the feedback that comes from an icebreaker then is people saying, you have all these amazing experiences that we want to hear about, and every one of those that you mentioned is multiple speeches. If you look into them. And people often think when they start speaking that they have nothing to talk about, and they have nothing that would be worth listening to. And I say this often, one of the most interesting speeches I ever listened to, and I don't know if you were in the room, there was a man in Galway gave a speech about how to buy a tent. And it's something that I had never looked into. I had no concept of it, because it was something that he had researched thoroughly. And he gave a very detailed explanation of why each of these things were important. It was fascinating. And people give speeches about things that because of, I don't have an interest in it at the moment. I don't look up, and I'm not aware of. And I'm then in a room where people are speaking about things that they're passionate about, be that buying a tent or rugby or, traveling or visiting sacred spaces, anything. There's a wealth of inspiration. And I could keep talking about that, but essentially there's, every single member, if you tap back into some point in their journey, there's a moment in which they inspired somebody else.
Definitely, there is a wealth of inspiration in Toastmasters, and it's so diverse. I love coming back every time and not knowing what people are going to talk about, what's going to emerge or unfold. And I loved watching people do their first speech, or people in training, or people who are overcoming their fears of speaking. It's really beautiful to see that development, and I see it as a storytelling session really myself. And I'd be so intrigued to come back to next week to see what I'd learn or how I'd grow from what I listen to. Yeah, it's great. It's great. I never asked you, Paul, what about your own background? How did you come to join Toastmasters originally yourself?
My initial exposure to Toastmasters is through my dad. So my dad has been a member of Toastmasters for about 20 something years. And I think I'd attended a meeting years ago, maybe early 2000s. And I enjoyed it, but I had no sense that this was something that I wanted to take part in. And then I was living in Scotland, in Edinburgh, and I came home from my sister's wedding, and my dad did the Father of the Bride speech, and he took the microphone and walked into the center of the room and delivered a speech that was, perfectly rehearsed and timed, and it was, exactly 4 minutes long or something, and had all the jokes in the right places and set the right tone. And I was massively impressed. And then when I went back to Scotland, I attended 1 or 2 meetings there, but it wasn't the right time for me to start. I was still too kind of intimidated and a little bit overwhelmed at the idea of speaking to a room of people, especially there was maybe something else about it being in a different country that I didn't have the same frame of reference as everybody else. So there was an even higher bar or hurdle to come across. And then when I came back to Ireland, I was living in Kinsale, and I attended the local club there, which was really small and wasn't intimidating. And there was maybe 15 people in the room, and everybody had a role, and everybody was doing something on the agenda. And so I did my first, I think, 5 speeches there. And then because it's a small club, when we were having contests, everybody was encouraged to take part in the contest. So I took part in the evaluation contest, having probably never evaluated a speech before. And then I won the contest in the club, and I don't know how many people were in the contest, maybe 2 or 3. And then I won the area, and then I went to the division contest, which was quite a challenge because, here's a room full of very experienced Toastmasters, and it's on a stage, and there's 100 plus people in the room. And that's in the organization for a short time. But after that, I had a sense of the enormity of the community and the diversity and the single purpose of mission, to support each other. So anytime that I moved somewhere new, which was often, I joined the little Toastmasters club.
You're right, and that's what I loved about the organisation as well. It does have a single mission of people supporting each other, and that is evident if someone joins a club and stays long enough to understand the mission and the people. Yeah. Personally, for you, Paul, in your own experience, in mentoring, in evaluating other people's speeches, in being president a couple of times, what would your top 3 tips be for someone who wants to become more confident or a more competent communicator?
Well, the first tip is going to be obvious. I'm going to say find your local Toastmasters club. And because they're all online at the moment, there's no sense that you might be too far away. So there's always an opportunity to speak. And there are members now, because of COVID and Zoom, who attend multiple clubs a week all around the world. So there's a member in our club who's originally from Texas, and friends of hers who were in our local club moved to Scotland, to Inverness. So she attends every 2 weeks, our meetings, the meetings in Inverness, and 2 clubs in Austin, Texas. So there's always an opportunity to speak. And so if I was to suggest to somebody how to speak up more outside of joining a Toastmasters club, the first thing, and maybe this would be then what I would say to somebody who was in a meeting, who was presented with a topic or an opportunity to speak in some way, would be to say something, anything. It doesn't need to be very long, and it doesn't need to be profound. It just needs to be that your voice is heard in the room. And in terms of speaking tips, the most important thing would be to take a breath before you speak. Don't feel like you have to rush or you have to get somewhere in particular, and allow time for pauses in between your sentences. Like you have a right to think, and some people think on their feet while they're talking, and some people have the thoughts prepared in their heads before you've even had a chance to breathe. And then others, like me, think slowly and need to have lots of pauses before responding and lots of reframing of things to be able to get the words out.
That's gorgeous. Just say something, take that first step. Yeah, it's so important. And I recommend that to people myself as well, about taking a breath, because I see it as respect for yourself, as someone delivering a message that's important, and it allows the audience time to absorb what you've just said. So, yeah, I totally agree with those. Have you ever heard of the motivational speaker Les Brown?
I know the name, but I haven't.
He says you should never tell a story without a point, or a point without a story. What do you think about that yourself as a professional speaker?
Well, I wouldn't say that I'm a professional speaker, but I agree that you should never have a story without a point. And I also agree with the point without a story, because you need to have some reason for having spoken. So there needs to have been a question asked that you're answering, or there needs to be something that you're asking your audience to do or take on board or to hear. Even if the point is that you have a chance to speak out loud and to formulate your thoughts in that moment, but there needs to be some purpose. And the point without a story is also crucial, because we are social animals and we connect through other people. Like our brain's default mode is social, and stories give us context about where we are in the world, but also why this topic or this point is something that's resonant for us, or what it is that we're trying to communicate through it, or how it fits into our lives. So for instance, at the meeting the other night, someone gave a speech about tips for speaking well, or not sleep well, tips for sleeping well. So it was, how sleep works and how we can sleep better and so on. But it was all information, and the feedback that this person got was, the information is fantastic, but if you gave us a story at the start about why sleep is important to you, or why this topic is relevant to you in your life, then we would have a way of connecting with you as the speaker and understand why this topic is important to you, and that would help us to value this topic as well.
That's amazing, Paul. I love hearing all your stories and where you have come from. It's really lovely to listen to. And I love what you said about some people thinking really quick and other people needing more time. That's true. My question is, do you have any great stories about Irish people being great storytellers?
I don't know if I can say that Irish people are better storytellers than others, because I have never experienced the world not as an Irish person. So my way of connecting with other people's ways of speaking is through my own way of understanding. So, but I know that, the joke about Irish people not being able to give a short answer to any question is very true. And I'm thinking slowly about this. Let me see if there's a way that I can reframe this. So as examples of how we use story, perhaps. Actually, one of the really interesting ways that Irish people in particular use story is our questions about where do you come from? And it's been one that's been, a very dear friend of mine works with refugees and people who have been trafficked, and people who are not from Ireland for difficult reasons. And a topic that often comes up is, the where do you come from, which in Ireland doesn't necessarily mean I want to know your ethnic background. It means I want to know where were you born and where did you grow up. And it's one of our essential ways of connecting with other people is through landscape, and landscape carries story, and we have huge associations with landscape. So even yesterday when we went for a walk, we met one of our neighbors for the first time, but from that meeting we now know like the town where she grew up and where her grandparents lived, and she knows about how my connection with where her grandparents as well, and all those little bits and pieces. But it's all based through the story of land and the story of places, and we ask those questions about where do you come from, so that we can then find our own association with it. So like, I've been there, and this is what I saw there, or I know somebody from there, and it's all about finding a connection. It's like, so when we ask where you're from, it's not you're not from here and you're not welcome. It's I want to find how we're from the same place. And I don't know if that answers your question around storytelling, or if it was me answering your question with a story.
That's brilliant. And I can relate it back to my own mum. Sometimes she'd be telling me a story about someone who passed away in the community. And she'd say, "You know them, don't you, Ash? It's this person's daughter's sister-in-law's cousin's brother." And I'd be like, "No, sorry, I can't place them." But she'd always have a big story of connection behind it, trying to explain it to me.
I used to have a bit of that about saying, no, I don't know them. And I used to feel guilty that I didn't, and that I had somehow a sense of, not that I was doing my mother wrong, but I had somehow lost a sense of connection with where I was from, and I didn't know the stories. And I've shared this before with people, but how that reconciled itself with me was that I was having a walk in the field where I'm from, the family field. And I remember thinking that I didn't know the stories of the place, and I didn't know all the people, but that was okay, because the place and the people knew me. And that if I allowed that sense of connection to be there anyway, I didn't need to justify it, and I didn't need to qualify for it. So now when someone says, such and such, I can say, I know this person or that person. How are they connected? So tell me more about the story, and tell me how they're connected, and be interested in that social community, because it's really important. Like, it's really important to put value on the people in your community, even if you've no space in your life to know more people, but to value that they're genuine human beings living their own lives in their own way, to the best way they know how. And just because I don't know them or know their story, or if I'm not particularly interested in that moment in time, the person who's sharing that with me, so if it's my mother telling me about someone who died or so on, it's respectful to her and to her tradition and her community and mine to take that little bit of an interest in the moment, to inquire in the story and to connect with it.
Yeah, it's very important to the person. Tell me more. I love that. And I'm actually going to use that from now on. Thanks a million. Because I can see how that'll help her to feel heard.
Yeah.
Very good.
This is not of interest to me. Be gone and come back with something that I value.
Yeah.
This is a very good conversation. My next question is, what does positivity mean for you?
That's a good question, and because it's challenging. I can answer this by sharing one of my own personal practices. And I think I got this practice from that guy Brezzy a couple of years ago at a work conference, because my morning practice now is in my bullet journal. As well as doing some morning pages and so on, I start each day by writing down 5 things that I'm grateful for, and then I end the day with 5 things that happened today that I'm thankful for. And the reason I do that is because, as we were talking about earlier, the positivity bias or the negativity bias that we all have, that we need to overcome, and we need to have a practice of focusing on the good rather than what we want to complain about. And there was a phrase, I'm quite wary sometimes of things around conversations around manifesting and that sort of narrative, because it can often focus on lack, and rather than saying, I want these things that I don't have in my life. Whereas if you actually focus on what you do have, you realize the richness that you already have. And there's a book I read a couple of years, 2 years ago maybe, called The Soul of Money. It's not an amazing book, but it had a few things in it that I found very valuable. And I think it was in that book where the author talked about how, what you appreciate appreciates. So, which is a nice phrase. And so if you actually think, okay, I'm going to appreciate, the things that are genuinely nourishing to me in my life. So, you know, my relationships, my well-being, my health, the well-being of the people in my life, all the good things in the world, the natural resources around me, sunlight, air that I breathe, and so on. And that sense of abundance means that I'm coming into the world and I'm being in the world from a sense of everything's okay, and rather than neediness or resentment, which is very easy to slip into. And so for me, positivity, okay, has multiple ramifications. One, I'm happier because of those sorts of practices and those sorts of beliefs. But I think that I'm also of greater impact in the world, or that I'm able to do more in the world because I come to it with that sense that, I am enough and I do enough, and here's a little thing that I can do to help someone else.
I love that. So what you appreciates, and then you could also say that what you depreciates.
Awesome.
Paul, that's unreal that you took on board what Brezzy said and that you applied it straight away. I was at that conference as well and I didn't take on that practice. However, I do have my own that I do on a daily basis. But that's amazing. I love hearing these stories because a lot of people read books, go to seminars, events, learn techniques, but don't continue to apply them. What do you think is the connecting link for you for that one event we went to and then you took on the practice and started using it straight away?
I don't remember if it was a conscious decision to apply something specifically from that. I remember that it may have been just a tool that was now in my toolbox that I knew that I could apply. And it fitted in with my existing practices. So for years I've been, slightly tweaking and making my own morning routine that's my own, and that seemed to fit into a space because I do read a lot around the whole self-improvement. Sorry, this is audio, so you're missing that I'm doing air quotes around this self-improvement conversation. And I'm very involved in some spiritual conversations as well. And I also have, from that, am I allowed to swear? Right. I have quite a low tolerance for bullshit. And I also have quite an aversion now to grandiosity or inflated egos. Not saying that I'm any better than those people, but I have a low tolerance for that in my life. So where I was going with that is I remember reading Atomic Habits a couple of years ago, and before that, for several years before that, I'd read books on getting things done and all those sorts of where business world meets psychotherapy world and spirituality around having goals and focus in life. So this, I think maybe I took that on board because it wasn't something, oh, here's a revelation and I'm going to go and apply it. It was part of an ongoing conversation that I was having with myself for the last forever, since I was 15 years old, about finding ways to be my best self in the world. So when I found that tool, I think I used that tool because it was something that was relevant to me, relevant to the thoughts and conversations that I was having with me. And I could see where there was a need in my life for that.
That's brilliant, Paul. Thanks for sharing that. I love hearing people's perspectives of how they come to make a change in their life that helps them to be more happy on a day-to-day basis. I know sometimes it can be for people that they connect to the person's story or the person themselves, or it could be a book that they read, or the technique just makes sense, or it's simple and effective. And in other cases, like yourself, where someone has done a lot of research, a lot of reading, and it's just the right moment in time with the right practice. So that's brilliant. I'm delighted that you have that in place. Because I really feel off you that your essence is much lighter, but that could be the new house or it could be the family of bulldogs you have.
It's also probably the diet as well.
Yeah, there's so many variables, isn't there, really?
Food has definitely had a big impact. And I, like, in September last year, my husband and I started following one of the Happy Pair courses. So we've been, apart from the occasional ice cream and biscuit binge, we've been primarily vegan for the last few months. Like when we moved house, we just stocked the freezer full of not good food for us, things that went in the oven, like pizzas and breaded chicken and things. But we didn't feel good after a few weeks, so we went back to our plant-based eating.
Wow, so you're not only looking after your mental health, you're also focused on your physical health as well. Incredible. And I love the Happy Pair. We had them earlier on the podcast, and they are doing tremendous work for people's physical health. Those adverts keep popping up actually, and I've never done one of the good courses that they have on offer, but maybe in the future I will. But thanks for sharing that too. And this brings us to the end of part 1 of a 2-part podcast we recorded with Paul. We decided to divide this up into 2 to help you absorb the profound wisdom Paul shares about public speaking and positive practices on this podcast. We hope that you join us next week, where we chat to Paul about being a celebrant, a druid, and his greatest life wisdom. Congratulations, well done. Pat yourself on the back. You're officially now a partner in positivity with us. If this is your first episode, we're so grateful. If this is your 40th episode, we're equally as grateful for your ears, for your heart, for taking this time out for yourself and committing to your own positive mental health journey. Our intention for this podcast is for you to feel a little bit better afterwards. So we hope you take some time now to check in with yourself. How did you feel before? How do you feel now? And we've definitely done our job if you feel a little bit better, and especially if you want to come back for more next week. If you do want to support us, we actually have a Ko-fi donation page. It's ko-fi.com/partners in positivity. We really value the work that we're doing. We know there's so much positive and negative in the world, and we want to contribute to people feeling their best. So we appreciate all of the donations we've had so far and welcome any more that are on the way. Thank you in advance. Also, if you got something of value from this and you want to share with friends or family to add to this trend of positivity in the world, we would love to be tagged in any posts on social media. You know where to find us. Other than that, guys, have an incredible week ahead, and we look forward to feeding you some more nourishment for that beautiful mind, that beautiful garden of yours next week.